Hey guys, how's everybody doing today? As I promised in my unboxing video, I'm going to start putting together one of my DIY recording equipment 500 series modules. I went for the color modules set up on this, and I think I've shown this in a live stream, but this is one of them already put together. Anyway, this is the DIY recording equipment color module. This is their 500 series color palette, and I have three of their color modules for it, and I bought 2 of them so I can do stereo. I went for the 15 IPS tape emulator. I went for the JFET transistor console emulator, and just for something a little bit different, I went for the Mojo Maestro clipping color module. So there's like 3 different levels of saturation here, and the palette itself is also assembled. This is the full DIY kit. One of these all put together was $300 for all of the equipment, or all of the modules included in it. So like I said, this is not going to be a step-by-step walkthrough. I'm going to just kind of like let the camera run while I put it together, and as I find things that I think I want to let you guys in on, I'll let you know, and then I'll just edit it all together at the end. I'm going to start with the Mojo Maestro module, and if this is your first DIY equipment type of a kit build. If you've never had any kind of experience with soldering and stuff before, I recommend you start as simple as you can. Okay, the Mojo Maestro is the simplest of the modules involved here. The DIY recording equipment website is really good for beginners and stuff. It has a basic like beginner walkthrough section in it where it tells you, it gives you like an equipment list of things that you're going to need. It ties into a couple YouTube videos on how to solder, and gives you a good complete list of everything you're going to need to get started. Now, me personally, I've been doing this for a while. I've built many guitars and stuff in my day. To be honest with you, this was my first actual little electronics kit myself, so I definitely was a little bit intimidated at first to get started on this, but it went pretty well, and I was actually quite happy with the first run through. I did start on the color palette, which is the most complex of the entire build, which was probably a mistake on my part. But I wanted to have something I could test each module with as I built it. So I built the actual color palette itself. The color palette's going to be its own separate video, I believe, on this. Okay. Also in the DIY recording equipment website, they give you a list of required tools, and their equipment list is pretty simple. You need a soldering iron. This is my trusty Weller that I've had for many years. You need a soldering iron. You need solder. I bought their recommended solder. This is a Kester 6040 lead tin, and this is like 0.031 millimeter, or 0.031 inch. This is very thin solder compared to what I normally use for like guitar assembly and stuff. This is really thin and light. And the lead doesn't bother me. I don't, the lead fumes, you're not getting lead fumes off of the solder. You're getting any fumes you're getting off of it are from the rosin core. So I don't really worry about it too much. So you have that. You're gonna need some kind of a pair of nipper cutters, and your soldering iron, some nipper cutters. Now I've added in a few extra things of my own. One thing I always have handy here, and they do recommend it as well, is I have my multimeter for testing resistors. Resistors are very small, and they're identified by various color bands. And even using a magnifying glass, which is another thing I keep handy, I have a magnifying glass here at all times. Even using a magnifying glass, I have trouble identifying which resistor is which, so I use the multimeter to qualify the resistors. On their website, and I was, as somebody who's done a few different projects, but this being my first electronics project, Their assembly directions are second to none. You know, like their website, every module on the website has a resources tab, and it has like their assembly directions, and it just walks you through. So like I have my laptop here with the assembly instructions right on it, so I will scroll through it as I put it together. Also in there, they have the component sorting sheets. Now these things, you want to print these out and have these available to you, okay? They give you the actual, you know, outline of the component in pretty much real size. And if you look at the kit itself, they come bagged, and it's basically a progressive thing. They have bag number 1, bag number 2. This one has, I believe, 4. Yeah, this one has 4 bags, plus the IC, plus the actual integrated circuit board. Okay, so basically it's just a progression thing. You take bag 1, you sort it onto your sheet, you assemble as per the directions, and then you move on to bag 2, bag 3, and bag 4. What's nice on the sorting sheet is the outline has the actual shapes of everything, and it also has, like for the resistors, it has each resistor its location labeled. So resistor 1. So like you've got 3 10K resistors, they go in R1, R6, and R7. So if you look at the actual PCB board itself, it is also laid out exactly like that, okay? Each component is identified by location. If it's a position critical, like the IC socket has to go in a certain way. The IC socket actually has a little notch on it, and you line the notch up with the outline of it on the IC board. It's absolutely foolproof if you just take your time, pay attention, and and don't get too far ahead of yourself. This is one of those things where it's like, yeah, you want to get these done, you want to find out if they work, but you also want to enjoy the assembly experience and learn something from it, and then also guarantee that it's going to work when you're done. So like I say, you want to work, slowly and carefully, and make sure that you're following the directions, very closely. So I'm already set up here. I got my soldering iron is nice and hot up to temp. Now I do, some people are going to watch me do this and say, you got your soldering iron too hot. Yes, I know. I have my soldering iron too hot. I'm used to it. That's how I'm used. That's just what I'm used to working. Some people would probably say to, you're going to want to work probably a little bit, lighter than that especially if you're new at this. But I've been doing this for a while, so I can get in and out of it pretty quick, okay? Another thing I like to do is I like to cut off a length of solder and just wind it around like that, so that I'm not pulling this thing around the table all the time. So I just have a winding of solder just sitting right here as well. I have my cutters, I have a couple of different screwdrivers, and I also have a little pick probe that I use to bend the pins back up when I'm done soldering things in place, so that everything goes. I also like to keep a little garbage bowl on the table for all the garbage that you're going to make. Just throw in that to keep your work area as neat and tidy as you can. Because as I said, you want to work slowly and carefully. Also, as you can see, I'm sitting at my workbench quite low. I like to get in close to my work, and this is a very comfortable work height for me. The idea for you would be to find what works for you, what's the most comfortable work height for you. And like I said, and make sure that you can see clearly everything that you're doing. You will also notice with me that my glasses come off a lot, which is probably a bad idea. You should wear safety glasses when you're using solder, because it can spatter. But like I said, I need to be able to see what I'm doing, and my 57-year-old eyes aren't what they used to be. So thus the magnifying glass and the tester and taking my glasses off to work, everything is just so that I can see what I'm doing quite clearly. Okay. So I'm going to get started on this. Like I say, I'm going to let the camera roll while I do this. If I see something that I think needs to be talked about, I will stop and let you do it. Either that, or I may actually I don't know, if I haven't decided yet. When I edit this, I'll figure it out if I'm just going to fast forward through everything or whatever. But we'll see how it works out as we go. Okay. So I'm going to get started on this. I have the first component sorting sheet on the table in front of me. There's another one over here for when I get to it. I also even printed out the assembly directions, but I got them on the computer, so I'm not gonna need that here. Okay, so let me get started on this, and like I said, I'll let you see how things go as they happen. Okay, so everybody just sit tight, have fun. Okay, one tip before I even do the first solder is that a lot of these pins on these things are really, really close together. So what I tend to do when I'm soldering on something like this is I skip around so I'm not soldering one pin right next to the other, okay? That way it gives the area of the board that you just worked on a chance to cool off before you heat it back up again, okay? So let's get going here. Okay, like I said too, the IC chip, I'm going to try to get this into the camera so you can see it. The IC chip has a little notch on one side, okay? The board itself has a little map on it where the notch goes. So make sure that everything is matching up, okay? Because the actual IC chip itself, when you get to installing the IC chip later, has a little hole drilled into one piece of it that you line up with the notch so that everything is all pointed in the same direction. Okay, now that the first bag worth of stuff is done, I have the header pins on the back of it for that where it goes through into the color palette. I have the IC chip soldered on with the notch lined up with their notch. The next thing is the resistors. Now, I think, as I said in the introduction, this one, I don't know, what does this thing have? Like about 10 resistors that this one uses. The resistors are very small. Their base color is blue, and then they have color stripes around them, and there's no way you're going to see this until you actually have one in your hand. They have color stripes around them to identify which one is which. Now, I cannot see this, okay? There's no way I can read these. So the way I do this is usually like this. These things have to be bent over to a 90-degree angle to go through the board, okay? So what I tend to do is I just tend to just grab all of them and I bend them over. Now I use a little steel ruler to bend them over so you're not putting any tension on the actual resistor itself when you do this. So I just take it and bend it over the ruler, bend the pins over the ruler so that they're at a 90-degree angle, like this, okay? And I just get them all lined up, and then I have my multi-tester here, and I will check the resistance of each one and put it in its proper place on the sorting sheet, okay? Now this is one of those things too where, like, once you get started on this, don't knock anything, you know, like don't knock the sorting sheet so that you don't knock everything out of line, okay? But again, you just very carefully bend all the pins over the ruler so you're not putting too much tension. This becomes way more critical later when we get to the diodes, because the diodes are ridiculously fragile. So again, you just do all of these like this, and then you test all your resistances with your multimeter. Okay, so now I have all of the resistors bent over at a 90-degree angle. We'll turn our multimeter on. Yes, I know. And we just start testing them. Basically, you just have if you don't have a multimeter, by the way, you can get these off of Amazon for not a lot of money. You can get it for like $10 or $15. That's all you really need to do a job like this, to test resistances. This is actually a very good one, but I've had this for many, many years, so that's what it is. So you basically just touch the probe to each one of the legs. You look at your multimeter and you see that this is a 9.94K, so this is basically a 10K, okay? So then you take that, and on your sorting sheet, there's a 10K. Put it on the 10K one, and you go to your next one, and you do all of them just like that. You just test each one individually. Come on. That's also a 10K. And so forth until you have them all sorted. All right, I'm about to measure the last one, but I just got something in mind that I just want to talk about really quick. You know how they talk about tolerances in electrical components? That's something that you will notice doing a project like this really quick, testing resistances on these resistors. Like this resistor right here that I'm testing right now is 1.595K, okay? So that is actually on the sorting sheet listed as a 1.6. There's three 10K resistors on here. Each one was a slightly different. Some of them were like 9.93, 9.95, and one of them was 10.1. So even though they're all rated at 10K, there's slightly differences in the variations. That's what we mean when we talk about, you know, variations in electronic components. And that's why different channels on boards sound different, or that's why different amplifiers sound different. It's because every component is slightly different than the other ones. And, you know, and it's that variation that causes the differences in them, okay? So now I'm going to start placing the resistors, okay? And they are on the PCB board. They're labeled R1, R2, R3, all the way through. This one has, what is it, R7? I think is the top one. There's probably more than that. I'm probably missing a few. But anyway, you place your resistors, you know, very carefully. Again, the board is labeled with each value, so you know that you're putting them in the right place, plus each value is listed on the sorting sheet. So R1, it's a 10K resistor. You drop that down through the holes, okay? Get it down to where it's level, and then you take the pins and you bend them over that way, okay, so that the resistor stays in place. And then you do that with all of the other resistors. Now be careful with this one if you're doing this one, because there's two clipping diodes in the middle of the resistors. So be careful that you're not dropping a resistor in a clipping diode spot, okay? So I'm just going to start dropping in the resistors. I'm only going to do, there's two rows. There's resistors on this row, and then there's resistors on this row. I'm only going to do one row at a time, okay? So I'm going to do I'm going to do R1 through R4 on this side, and then I'm going to solder them down, cut the tips off, and then I'm going to do the other row, same thing. Place them, bend them over, solder them in place, and then clip the excess pins off. So I'm going to do this in two stages. R3 is 1.6K. Okay, now that I got those four in place, I'm giving it a minute for it to cool off, because if you touch these things right after you're done soldering them down, they're hot. You're going to burn yourself. Everything is, like I say, you have to be careful with everything that you're doing. So I will take my probe here and I will bend those up on both sides as vertical as I can and as tight in as I can. And I got my mini nippers, and just cut the pins off as close to the solder joint as you can. Okay, so that's one side. That's one side already in. And now I'm going to lay in the other side and do it exactly the same way. All right, so we're making good progress here. All of the resistors are in place. This one should probably get moved a little bit towards there. There we go. Okay. So we're making good progress here. All the resistors are in. All the resistors are in and placed. And that's 2 bags worth of stuff done. There's only 4 bags to do, so we're making pretty good progress here. So this sorting sheet is now done. We'll switch over to this sorting sheet, and we will advance our assembly instructions. Okay, so let's see. So bag 3. Bag 3's got some interesting stuff in it. Bag 3 has some capacitors. It has a couple clipping diodes, which are incredibly fragile, as I said. And what's nice is that DIY recording equipment send you an extra diode in case you do something stupid like breaking one, which, yeah, I did that on the first one when I did it. So be careful with those. These are 1N34 diodes. They're the same diode. Okay, there's a couple of little 1U, very small little ceramic capacitors. There's a green film capacitor, and there is a electrolytic capacitor here. Okay, and then there are the headers and the shunts and the headers for selecting which function that you're using. And somewhere over here in bag 4 is the integrated circuit chip. We'll get to that. Okay, we're going to leave that up there for now. So in this one, the thing you got to be careful with is the C1 and the D2, the two capacitors are polarity matched. Okay, so is it the C1? Hold on. Okay, nope. On the C1, the little film capacitor, this one is not polarity, does not have a polarity issue. The electrolytic capacitor does have a polarity issue. You have to pay attention to that. It's got a positive and a negative. On this one, the positive lead is longer, the negative lead is shorter, and then there is a stripe on the negative side. Now on the actual IC chip on the integrated circuit board itself, it does have positive listed to one side and negative listed to the other. So again, that's something that you just have to pay very, very close attention to when you place it. The two little ceramic capacitors are not polarity matched either, so they go in their holes, whichever direction they go in will be fine. All right, now all 4 of the capacitors are in place. The C2 capacitor here, as I said, you'll be very careful. The positive had the longer lead on it, and then the negative side has the stripe. So you double check yourself too that there's a little plus sign there for the positive side. The negative stripe is on the opposite side of that, so you know that that's in the right place. The other 3 were not polarity issued, so they just went in whichever way they went in, they're fine. Now that brings us to the 2 clipping diodes. Now, like I said, they give you 3 for a reason, okay? The diodes are glass, and they have a stripe on one end, okay? And they go in as they very much matters which way they go in. There is a stripe on there that shows you which end goes in which. Now, bending these over is incredibly, you gotta be very, very careful with this. So you'd be just gingerly bend that pin over, shift over to the other one, and repeat the process, gingerly bending those pins over. Okay, repeat that on the second one. Okay, and then place them with the stripe on it corresponding to the stripe position on the circuit board, okay? So in this case, on this one, the stripe goes to the right. And then just like with the resistors, bend the pins over to solder them in place, to hold it in place until you solder it. So make sure that both these clipping diodes, they go the same direction. Get them positioned, bent over, and solder them into place. So all that's left to do now is get the 2 pin headers into place for the shunts. you have a nice leftover clipping diode. Because I did it right this time, it didn't break one. So you got your clipping diodes in place, and then the last thing to do is to put your two headers in place, which is just simply a matter of position this. You can they're slightly longer, so that you should be able to at least bend it over a little bit. I will use a screwdriver to bend it over a little bit to keep it in place. See if that'll hold it. Nope, that won't. And if that doesn't work, I do have an alligator clip handy to put that in place with, to hold that in place until I can get at least one of the pins soldered in. All right. Now, the shorting bars, the headers are for selecting on this particular one whether you're going to use symmetrical or asymmetrical clipping, and whether you want the glue or the Mojo setting on each channel. That's what this one does. Either symmetrical. I'm not even sure how it works, to be honest with you. Anyway, you would then, I tend to go for glue, symmetrical glue. At least that's the way I have my first one set up, so I'm going to keep it even. So I'm just going to put the shunts in place now for symmetrical glue. There's two clipping diodes on there. So the asymmetrical would only use one. The symmetrical uses both. Okay, that's how it works. And so each one of the clipping diodes can be set to either glue or the Mojo setting. So you can either have, if you have it in asymmetrical, it's only using one clipping diode, so it only matters on one. But if you're using it in symmetrical and you're using both clipping diodes, you can set one clipping diode to glue, the other one to Mojo. So you've got like 6 different levels of clipping that you can do on this. So, like I said, I'm basically defaulting to symmetrical glue. It's a simple matter of swapping around until you find whichever one you like. That's it. That's where I'm kind of defaulting to. Now, the very last thing we have to do here is we have to place the IC chip. Okay. This is a dual op amp IC chip, so it is very much polarity sensitive. And they have it in the bag, and they also have it in a little foamy holder to keep the pins happy. So, and you look at your IC chip, and there is a little, and it is hard to see, there is a little round, like, indent in it, okay? And as per the instructions on here, if I remember correctly, and I'm going to double check myself before I do this, you place the IC chip so that the dot on the IC is on the same side as the notch on the socket. So you have your notch on the socket. There's an indent on the IC. The legs are probably splayed a little bit too far out to go in easily, so you just want to like squeeze the legs in gently a little bit so that they go into the IC chip straight. Double check, triple check your positioning. You got your dot. You got your notch, and then the IC chip. Once you get all 8 legs lined up, goes down in and tension holds it in place. So that is a completely assembled Mojo Maestro module. Okay. All of before you finish though, you want to make sure that you have everything in the proper place. You want to make sure that your clipping diodes, the stripes line up to the right side. You want to make sure that your electrolytic capacitor has the positive and negative polarity in the right place. Make sure that everything else is in a good position lined up. Then you want to look at your solders over here and make sure that you didn't overlap any of your solders, which would short out a connection. On the electrolytic capacitor, they are really, really close together, so I would tend to just kind of like take something and just make sure, just like rub in between there, make sure that they're not touching. Make sure that your pins are all cut off as close as they can be. And this module is finished and ready for testing at this point in time. Okay, so now we're back to put together the next module. In the last segment, you saw me put together the Mojo Maestro. In this one, we're going to put together the JFET Class A color module. And since the assembly of this one is pretty much exactly the same as the other one with just a few variations, I'm probably not going to talk as much through this one. So it is pretty much the same. However, this one does use actual transistors as opposed to just the resistors, which I will go over because there are a few interesting things that happen with the transistors. This one uses a heck of a lot more resistors. It uses more capacitors. There are no diodes in this one. So this is pretty much a much more straightforward circuit, even though there's more components on the board. As I'll put the board up there, you can see there's a lot more components that are going to get installed on this board. The variations are slightly less, but like I said, this one does use an actual JFET transistor. So when I get to the transistor portion of this assembly, I will definitely stop and walk you through that. However, like I said, as far as like assembly is concerned, it's exactly the same as the other one. I'm going to be doing exactly the same procedures with bending the resistors, testing the values, and so on. So there's really, not a lot of spectacularness going on here. So I'm going to get to work on this one and get going. Okay. Just a quick warning on the resistors on this one. There are 22K resistors and there's a 220K resistor. So it's a little bit easy to confuse them when you're sorting through them. So just make sure if you're using a multimeter that you're paying doubly, triply close attention to where the decimal point falls. Because I had to go through that a couple of times. This thing has a whole bunch of resistors to it, up to as big as I believe there's a 10 meg. There's a 10 mega ohm resistor on here. So this thing is using some pretty heavy duty stuff. Okay, and again, I'm going to populate this the same way I did before. I'm just going to do one row at a time. There's 2 rows of resistors on here. I'm going to do one row at a time, get them positioned, bent over, soldered in place, cut off, and then I'll do the other row, so that they're not like getting all tangled up in each other when you do it. So again, it's the same thing as before. The resistors are all labeled very carefully, which one goes where, both on the sheet and on the PCB board. So you can just look at it simply. The R1 takes a 1K and then so forth, and just assemble it, like one at a time. Again, as I said in the first one, slow and careful wins this race. Okay, so just take your time and get each one positioned properly. Okay, I've got all of the resistors populated, soldered in place, and trimmed back on the back. And now we get onto this one, onto what is the tricky part. There are 3 different kinds of transistors and 4 different kinds of capacitors that go into this board. The transistors are 1 2SK 170 FET compressed transistor. There's 4 BC327 transistors and 1 BC337 transistor. Now the thing with the transistors is they all look exactly the same. They are all little 3-legged black little transistors. They are D-shaped for polarity's sake, thankfully for that, okay? So on the board, where the transistors get populated is shaped in a D shape so that you just match those up. The BC337 is marked with silver on the top. That is a silver one on top, and then the other 4 are black on top. And where that transistor gets populated, they have actually like a solid silver look to it, okay? The JFET transistor goes on the opposite side of the board. So the 4 The 4 327 transistors all go together. The 337 transistor goes on the bottom, and then the JFET transistor goes over here, okay? So you got to be very, very, very careful. They were kind enough at DIYRE to put the JFET transistor in its own separate baggie, so you cannot confuse it with the other three. So this is one of those deals where you're going to do this one at a time very carefully, okay? So this one, you get this one out of its little baggie. This is the most important one. So this is the one you want to be the most careful with to make sure it goes in the right place and everything else. 3 legs, 3 holes, D-shaped marking on the board. So you get the 3 legs into the 3 holes. Make sure that you're corresponding to the D shape, so the flat side is to the right. Get that down in there as far as you can without breaking it. Bend the legs over, hold it in place. I splay them out in 3 different directions myself so that I can solder them easier. Okay, and stand that up straight, and then solder that one in place before you move on. All right, so your JFET transistor is now soldered in place, standing up straight and proud. All right, and you can move on to the next one. The 4 327 transistors all go in a little group over here, and then the 337 transistor goes down on the bottom. Again, it's the same thing. Populate each one, making sure that the flat side corresponds to the shape on the PCB board. Okay. All right, so all the transistors are populated and soldered in place. The T6 and the T4 transistors are both cocked a little bit to the side. That's not an issue, but it is doing a healthy job of triggering my OCD. So I'm gonna have to learn how to live with that. Thankfully, you can't see these when they're installed in your 500 rack. The next thing there's capacitors. There are 7 capacitors here. There's 4 electrolytic capacitors, which the same on the Mojo Maestro are polarity matched. So you have your negative side with the wide stripe and your positive side with the longer leg. Then there's 2 smaller capacitors, which thankfully for the magnifying glass, you have to read which one is which. One is a 68 PF and the other one is a 1 UF, and you have to get pretty far down in there to read which one is which. But one's larger and one is smaller, which makes populating them into the board a pretty simple thing. These are not polarity matched as far as I know. I'm going to double check myself right now. Place of smaller capacitors are not polarized. Okay, so the 2 smaller capacitors are not polarized. So they live right here. And there's a big and a small rectangle to stick them in. So we will put the large one in. Put the large one in, bend its legs over, or try to bend its legs over. They're pretty strong. And then put the smaller one in right next to it. And I don't know if I'm going to bother bending the legs over. I think I'm just going to drop that down and solder it in place with using its own weight to hold it in place. And then trim it back. All right, smaller ones in. Now I'm going to put the 4 electrolytic ones in. And as I said, again, paying very attention to your polarity. For these, the positive is up, negative is down. So the longer leg goes in to the top, shorter leg goes down to the bottom. All right, and the final component to go in is a ceramic cap, which is not polarized, so it does not matter what direction that one goes in. So you drop that into its little slot there and bend it over and solder it in place. All right, and that is the JFET Mark II color module, all assembled and ready to go. Much like the Mojo Maestro, it's actually not a very complicated build. It's just a matter of taking your time and making sure that you're doing it correctly and that you get everything in its proper place and in its proper orientation when that matters. Okay, so this one's done. That's 2 now. Now I have a Mojo Maestro and I have a JFET now. So I've got one more to go. And that is actually the most complicated, is because uses the most variety of components, and it uses the most fragile components. So I'm going to take a little bit of a break, and then we'll come back and we'll build the third one. All right, so now that I have the other two built and ready to go, we're going to tackle the final one. This is the 15 IPS color module. This one is a little more complicated than the other two, simply because it uses a heck of a lot more diodes, and there's also an LED involved in this one. It uses the usual resistors, capacitors, transistors. This one also does not use an IC chip, but it definitely is something you have to be a little bit more careful with, because those diodes, as in the Mojo Maestro, are incredibly fragile. And like I said, and as far as like the number of components that populate the board is concerned, this one is full. You're going to utilize the whole board on this one. So then this is another one, you know, again, as I've said before, and I will say again, slow and steady wins the race. Carefully, each thing, you got to, you know, everything has to be carefully considered out and accomplished on this project, so that you're guaranteed, you know, you're assured that it's going to work, and you don't have to send it into them for them to take a look at and figure out what you did wrong, okay? So as with the other two, I'm just going to start putting it together. I'm going to let the camera roll, and as I come up with things that I think should be addressed, I will stop the assembly and let you guys know, okay? Okay, the resistors are all sorted and populated, and as you can see on that, they're scattered around a much wider area than they were on the other two. So again, I did them in little groups to make sure that I wasn't like tangling all the legs up together and stuff. All right, next it's time to do the diodes, and much like on the Mojo Maestro, as I described there too, these things are incredibly fragile. So I used my little ruler to bend them over carefully. There's two different kinds of diodes in this one. There's a 1N914 diode. There's a pair of them, and these are super tiny. And as also with the Mojo Maestro, they are directional. There is a stripe on one end of each one of the diodes that has to correspond to the way that they're oriented on the PCB board. What's interesting about this one is that they keep going in opposite directions. So when you populate them, like on this one, the D1, the stripe is to the right, but on the D2, the stripe is to the left. So you got to make sure that you're paying strict attention to the way you're orienting your diodes when you populate your board. All the diodes are populated and soldered into place. There's a total of 10 of them. And like I said, they are oriented so that each one goes in the opposite direction, okay? That's very important, that the signal flows through the diodes correctly. There's also now going to be an LED. This is an red LED, and it is polarized. The positive leg is longer than the negative leg. And on the board, the LED, the positive leg goes towards the top, negative leg in the bottom. So you get that all the way down in and solder that into place. All right, this one also uses two different kinds of transistors. It uses the 327s and the 337s. As on the previous one, they are D-shaped. The 327s are black tops, and the 337s are silver tops. And the board itself is laid out so that you can tell the difference between the two. Like if you look right here in the middle, there's two black ones and then two plain ones. The black ones are the black top, the plain ones are the silver tops. They are all over the board. Again, like as on the other one, they're kind of scattered all over the board. So we'll be putting them on, you know, just basically a couple at a time so that they're not getting tangled up in each other. Okay, I was wrong. I'm going to correct myself on that. The silver ones go in the black filled in positions, and the black tops go in the plain ones. I had that backwards. So just make sure, just warn you ahead of time before you get started on this. Make sure you get that right, okay? Because I just almost screwed that one up. Transistors are in. And now to put the capacitors in. Again, as with the other two, there are 3 electrolytic capacitors which are polarized, so be careful which direction they go in. The other ones are not polarized or directional, so it doesn't matter which way they go in. There's 3 little film caps, there's 1 ceramic cap, and then there's 3 electrolytic caps. And that's it. It's done. That's ready to go too. So that's been all 3 modules built. I've probably spent a total of about 3 hours working on these, but that also includes, you know, video setup time, taking breaks to download in between and stuff. So probably the 3 modules took 2 hours or maybe a little bit less to completely put together. And again, like I said, this is, you know, working very slowly and very carefully. To make sure that, you know, like each joint is properly done and clean, keeping your workspace clean and tidy so that you don't, you know, you don't have to, you know, keep interfering with yourself in the job and so on. I mean, they gave you 3 extra diodes in this one. That was generous, okay? So, like I said, all 3 of these are ready to go for testing. I'll probably put these in my other board and test them really quick to make sure that they're all working properly before I continue. I still have one more project to do, and that would be the 4th color palette, the 2nd color palette. I mean, I'm sorry, and I'm gonna be taking a break for a while before I do that one, so that I'm, you know, fresh and ready to go on that, because that is a rather complicated build compared to these. So and that's going to be its own separate video. So at this point, I'm just going to end this one. Tell you guys as usual, hey, thanks for watching. Appreciate all the support from you guys. If you have any questions or anything, put them down in the comments of the video, and I'll try to get back to you. I'll make sure that David has all the links to the DIY RE stuff that I've done in this video for you guys to check out, and we'll catch you guys in the next video, okay? Take care, guys. Bye.